And the title says it all. We would like to talk about methane as a vehicle fuel in Europe, which is at the moment a very fascinating topic to talk about, particularly coming from the Brussels perspective. Who are we? NGVA Europe is the European Association for Gas and Transport, and as you correctly pointed out, Steve, we've been founded in 2008. We're representing more than 160 industrial members and national stakeholders from across the European Union and outside of the European Union. And here you see the 22 board members that create our board of directors. And one of the companies is, of course, very familiar to Steve as well. And take a guess what company that is. But I think it's interesting to see. In our last annual meeting of the members, we appointed 4 new board members: Daimler, Shell, Experion, and Bordgash. So the membership is growing and the business is growing. I would like to start and set the scene with a little flashback and speak about our annual conference in Brussels this year in July. We organize these conferences every year. It's our flagship event. And this time it was in Brussels for several good reasons, and I will come to that. And we had the Vice President of the EU and the Commissioner in charge of Transport, Sim Kallas, as our guest, who was inaugurating our event. And in his speech, he said, gas will play a major part as the most attractive option to replace oil-based fuels such as diesel, while the technologies are already mature. It is the lack of infrastructure that is holding up a broader uptake of gas as a vehicle fuel. At the same time, we had the breakfast debate with the Director General of the Directorate General of the European Commission for Transport and Mobility, Mr. Aguiar Machado, who also said that the use of oil is responsible for major greenhouse gas emissions. 24% of those come from the transport sector, and the transition to alternative fuels is urgent, both from the energy security and climate point of view. So natural gas is very important and has an important role to play, as does biogas. So I think these are quite significant statements showing that the European Union does support and sees natural gas and renewably sourced methane as a major part of the future transport evolution. So this is why it's not a surprise to just quickly summarize the European Alternative Fuel Strategy, which highlights that we of course have to become more independent from oil in order to diversify our energy supply. And of course, greenhouse gas emissions, very important, air quality, and also, last but not least, enhance the competitiveness of the European industry to boost innovation and growth. Speaking of growth, this slide probably has to be updated, but I like to show it anyhow to not forget how much such things, even if they take place outside of Europe, like the shale gas revolution and unconventional gas, and discussions around this topic can have an influence on our industry. I mean, the largest unconventional gas resources probably exist in China, whereas at the same time there is vast resources as well available in Europe. Will Europe and China explore those resources? We don't know. The UK maybe at the end of the decade, at least more likely than other countries in the EU. But what is a fact, of course, is that the US has grown the production of natural gas 25% in the last 4 years. They will do another increase of 30% natural gas production before 2020 and keep this magnitude for the decades to come, or even increase it. So it will have a fundamental impact on price and gas trade patterns globally. Well, how does the market look like? Well, we have here listed only the countries with the most NGVs per 1,000 people. You see at the top of the list Armenia, Argentina, Iran, Bolivia, Pakistan. Where's Europe? Italy is there. But Italy is, even though it's the strongest European market, 12 vehicles per 1,000 inhabitants, is that impressive? Maybe not. But it does show that the developments so far have taken place, obviously, somewhere else than in the world, rather than in Europe. When we have a look at the current European NGV market and the distribution of vehicles, we have here, and we are currently working on the new update, and that's going to be released rather soon. But here we have listed, divided by light-duty and heavy-duty vehicles, how many vehicles there are existing more or less. Also the UK number has of course to be updated. There is already many more trucks than the 650, I suppose. In relative terms, maybe not so many, because when you look at that, the market share we have is 0.5% overall. 0.5% market share. So that means around 1 million vehicles across the EU. In terms of development and market growth, we see a positive trend. There is per annum, and we've started to run our statistics in 2004, an average growth of 18% of the NGV population. Is that impressive? No, it is not. We would rather have to double, no, multiply by 100, multiply by 1,000 in order to reach the numbers that would make a difference. But anyhow, the trend is your friend. And we have reason to believe that this will grow and become much better in the near future. What's a bit interesting to see is that the red and the blue line don't match very well. We're always complaining about infrastructure, but this literally means that natural gas refueling stations are not profitable at the moment. We are lacking vehicles, but at the same time we lack stations. So it's the problem that we know or have been knowing since we started doing this business. But again, 18 million in the world, only 7% in Europe. We believe, and that is a very conservative forecast, that we have the potential to go to 5% by 2020, so that the market can grow tenfold in the next couple of years. So is this good enough? No, it is not, and the European Commission is supporting and sharing this view of us, which is why the EU has just recently published the so-called Clean Power for Transport package as the most recent EU policy action, and it includes a communication on the alternative fuel strategy, but most important is, of course, it is also including a directive on the deployment of alternative fuels infrastructure that was just adopted in the European Parliament on 15th of April. And in this communication, as well in the directive, natural gas and also biomethane, of course, play a very important role in the EU fuel mix. The directive as such, which was adopted in April, looks as follows from the gas point of view. It was a very fierce, let me say this to begin with, it was a very fierce discussion over years. And NGVA has been in that game, and we've tried to educate people along the way. And I think we're very pleased with the result that we see right now. And I know, and I'm sure that all of you have seen this before, but representing the Gas Vehicles Association, I would even like to call it historic, because it has never been before in the history of the EU that there has been a mandate to force member states to build infrastructure for alternative fuels. And this directive mandates and asks member states to develop so-called national policy frameworks, national policy action plans, to develop a strategy to develop the infrastructure for gas and electricity, natural gas and electricity infrastructure, and to promote a strategy to promote those fuels as well. So in detail, the directive foresees the development of a dense CNG refueling network in populated and densely populated areas and cities by 2020, CNG and LNG refueling along the 10T core network, that's the main transport routes in the EU, by 2025. These targets were fiercely discussed. They have been in the first draft mandatory. Member states didn't like mandatory targets. For example, they also deleted and requested to delete an annex mandating the exact number of electric charging points. So they would like more flexibility, and member states can now define themselves what they would like this to be. But they have, and the directive is now being translated, and it's going to be adopted on the in end of September. I think it's the 31st of September, and it's going to be published in the official journal of the EU now in October, which means it will become legislation. And then the UK, as well as all other member states in the EU, have 24 months to develop those national action plans according to these targets. Very importantly, the directive also foresees common technical standards by 2016. And that is summarized in work program 4 of the directive, annexed to this document, setting European standards for natural gas supply to ensure interoperability of gas vehicles, not only road but also maritime. So as you see here, LNG, LCNG, and CNG refueling points, as well as connectors and receptacles, have to be standardized. The European Commission has presented the draft mandate to CEN, Sen will now approve it during the next couple of days, and it will be then submitted to the College of the Commissioners to finally adopt it in order to implement common standards. And that is a major milestone, ladies and gentlemen, also for gas. I don't need to tell you that there has been a much more emotional debate about standards for electric vehicles. Germany, France, just to mention this again. So the overview of deadlines. There is only targets for natural gas and electricity. There was a proposal by the EU to also mandate hydrogen infrastructure. Member states didn't like it. They said, we don't know if it will happen at all. So we would prefer not to be obliged to develop a national policy framework for hydrogen. So here you see the summary again. What do we make out of this as the industry? Obviously, if now the UK government and other governments have to sit down and make up their minds, we cannot leave them alone. The European Commission is now hiring a consultant to map the market, to give recommendations. Is that good enough? No, we do not believe it's good enough. The NGVA is currently working on an initiative to create, let's say, a European roadmap for methane for transport throughout Europe, including recommendations and guidelines as an industry-backed initiative to support the development of these action plans in a coordinated approach together with the energy agencies. We will come up with a proposal. Of course, without your support, the industry support, it doesn't work. But just to say it's not yet existing, we are working intensively on that, and it's our offer to the governments, as well as you have to keep on doing national advocacy, explain the government what you are able to do, and use this opportunity to negotiate other, maybe non-policy, non-financial incentives or other policy recommendations that would you, as investors and industry, encourage to make a better offer to the government. Speaking of natural gas infrastructure, just very quickly, and this was one of our offers to improve how does the market look like. We have just recently published the European map of natural gas filling stations. We believe it's the first ever map of filling stations, although I have to be careful, there's other private people that have done something similar, but we have done it for the first time ever for CNG and LNG. Here you see the UK situation. This is the stations as least as they have been reported to us. Here with the plus, that's LCNG stations, so you can fuel CNG as well. These are planned under development or similar. If you would find any station that is missing, I mean, talk to us. We are just trying to compile the best offer for end users and commercial purposes, and you can check it out in this smart link. You find them up. Infrastructure, the lifeblood of our economy. Is there already EU support available for our infrastructure? Yes, there is. In fact, it is the Connecting Europe facility. There is 26 billion of EU funding money available for the funding period 2014 to 2020. Several of our members have already been successful in last calls. The next call is published today. You have until 25th of February to submit another project proposal for CNG and LNG infrastructure projects for road and maritime. The NGVA is, of course, happy to support our members. So another offer to you, if you're not supporting the NGVA, there's lots of good stuff we're doing, and make use of this opportunity. The transport budget, the total budget is 33 billion. So transport is the big part of this. So there's a strong focus by the EU on supporting infrastructure projects by the industry, and gas is eligible. Gas and CO2, I mean, there is, of course, a strong link, and we have to mention CO2. You know that CO2 targets have been defined for passenger cars. There is a target for vans as well. There is not yet a target for trucks. This is, again, to just highlight that the EU has the most ambitious target for 2020 in the world compared with other regions in the world of 95 grams. And the problem is certainly that you have to now, as a manufacturer, get very deep into the powertrain, and you need something else in order to get there, and that means you need alternative fuels, you need natural gas. Normally, I'm supposed to speak at UK events, and it's only about trucks, but you maybe will allow me that we, of course, also do represent passenger cars. Here's just a couple of the current models. I'm driving one of those myself, very convenient in performance, nice engines, good range, and those vehicles are, of course, low-emission champions, even without biomethane, and if you would add biomethane on top, and you would look at the well-to-wheel performance, impressive performance. and manufacturers aim at developing natural gas combustion engine technology in the same way as the turbo diesel engines have been successful in the past. So the next trend is gas. If you are wondering, okay, what's again the price of such a gas vehicle? Just very quickly, same car, city car, electric version of the Volkswagen Up, 27,000, natural gas CNG version, 13,000, petrol version, 1,500 more or less, and of course in terms of cost of ownership, unbeatable, isn't it? Air pollution and noise is of course the second big topic that was already in the focus of the EU last year. I'm just trying to highlight that natural gas vehicles of course improve the quality of life. We're advocating strongly already right now for next policy recommendations, for the next round of policy recommendations. Why is this black? Well, Benelux has 80% diesel vehicle share, so that's not a surprise. We need to do something urgently. I'm very shocked and sad to see that, for example, London is not making deliveries of gas trucks or is allowing gas vehicles entering the city and not ask for the congestion charge. I think that is not very smart, and that should be looked into. Regulated emissions. NOx and particulate matter emissions are regulated by Euro 6 legislation for trucks, and that is the truck example that is into force since January this year. For passenger cars, that has become valid on 1st of September this month. You are now able to register passenger cars as Euro 5 vehicles and in a transitional period until August next year, but Euro 6 is now established, and what my message in this slide would be, this for diesel has a cost. That on a heavy-duty vehicle is a cost of 10,000 euros. On a light-duty vehicle, on an average, 1,000 euros. For example, manufacturers like Renault are now stopping the production of small diesel vehicles because they become too expensive. Of course, heavy vehicles are much more expensive, and there is a delta issue, but anyhow, we are now coming down from around average 40,000 to 30,000 euros. So there is a positive development in terms of competitiveness. CO2 emissions, I mentioned it very briefly. There's now discussion starting at the EU level to discuss CO2 emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. You can all of that read in this link of the Commission. There is a first stakeholder meeting that will be attended by the NGVA on 16th of September in order to start discussions on how we could measure and report CO2 emissions from heavy-duty vehicles. We believe that whether it is regulated emissions, local pollutants, or CO2, there is a significant opportunity for natural gas vehicles, whether it is light, medium, or heavy duty, and that is shown by Horizon 2020. It's the second biggest funding package of the EU to fund research and development. And then there is right now an open call that focuses on natural gas powertrains and components for cars and vans, and also for heavy-duty vehicles. And that shows that there's of course a significant potential left to further improve efficiency of spark ignition and compression ignition engines running on methane. Total funding 70 billion. The next call under Horizon 2020 will be published in December this year, and I encourage you to also check this out, because what will be funded? Well, the EU is listening carefully to what the industry has to say, and there is a so-called European Road Transport Research Advisory Council. And we as the NGVA have developed together a recent roadmap on energy carriers for powertrains. There's lots about gas inside this roadmap, which will determine further funding opportunities of the EU. I'm now coming to my final chapter, the LNG Blue Corridor and LNG trucks. This, ladies and gentlemen, is certainly a breakthrough. We now have the Regulation 110 acknowledging LNG trucks and components. Finally, it is possible to homologate vehicles across the EU. There have been in the past only national homologation procedures, which was hampering our market. The infrastructure is developing in coordination with more attractive products. And here you see, for example, a picture of the first Belgian LNG station that was just recently opened in the Blue Corridor project. The Blue Corridor project, what is this? Well, this is again fantastic. On the one hand and disappointing on the other. I mean, we are discussing in this project to develop a network of 14 fueling stations and 100 trucks with EU money. I mean, in China there's 3,000 LNG stations, one being opened every day. So it's not that impressive, is it? But it's a start, and we have to start because the EU market for LNG is very fragmented. There is not a very homogeneous development so far, but the significant news is that this is the first time ever that the EU is giving direct funding to our technology, even though it's not very much, it's 8 million euros, but it's a significant message, and we will build up on that success, and we're already advocating for stronger support, technology support of stations and vehicles for gas trucks. That is fundamentally important to take it to the next level, to the implementation level, away from the demonstration. I mean, we need a station, and we need 100 station and 10,000 trucks, we believe. So we have now to get to the next level. Why am I? What I want to highlight as well is, of course, that we are developing just corridors to begin with. I mean, this is only an offer to start, to begin with something. So this is what we have more or less in mind. In order to fill these gaps, I mean, you remember the first map I've shown of gas vehicles. This is the gas vehicle map of gas trucks. And I think we have some gaps to fill and to connect the countries. And this is, of course, where the Blue Corridor comes into play. And also the Regulation 110 will obviously help to not make our trucks stop at European borders. And, Steve, that's important, UK is of course leader in this type of technology. I mean, that has to be mentioned. I'm nearly finished. This is the existing and planned LNG stations within the project. You see where the most stations are: UK, Spain, Sweden is quite all right, and of course Netherlands, very, very good developing market. We will build further stations. We have built 3 already, and this is the next one we will build in the project. And here is an invitation to all of you, because we are able to well, we have mostly Euro 6 vehicles in the project and Euro 6 demonstration, but we're able to fund a certain amount of Euro 5 vehicles as well, either if you register them now, or if they're already registered after, I think my colleague said, March 2013, we are, even if you're running Euro 5 trucks right now, able to fund your trucks with 14,000 euros per unit, per lorry. If we can use the lorries for the Blue Corridor project, how can we use them? You simply have to refuel at one of our stations, and you're eligible for funding within the Blue Corridor project. So that's an offer. We have a number of like 20 Euro 5 trucks left for the UK. So if there's any fleet operator in this room, you can have 20 trucks funded by the EU. In summary, and then I'm finished. This is the comprehensive set of actions to support methane as a vehicle fuel. I mentioned the Clean Power for Transport package. I mentioned the demonstration of heavy-duty vehicles running on liquefied methane. I've mentioned 10T and funding for infrastructure, and I've mentioned Horizon 2020 and research and development. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all rather recent developments, where gas was a couple of years ago quite in a different spot, and I think this is a very positive and encouraging message I was eager to bring to you here today. So I thank you, Steve, for this opportunity. And my final slide, and I don't comment on that, we've just tried to make a little smiley overview here. If you make a comparison of transport modes, what and where would work what, how, and if, and best. I think we're not too bad with smileys on the gas side, are we not? And with this, I am saying thank you. This is our team, by the way. Happy to answer any questions, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Steve.